Distinguished speakers and colleagues, my name is Jean d'Aragon, officer in charge of the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, or UNOSD, in Incheon, Republic of Korea. Welcome and thank you all for joining this International Mayors Forum preparatory webinar focusing on leaving no one behind, gender equality, and women's empowerment in our cities and communities. I'd like to welcome especially our distinguished speakers. First, Ms. Angela Moy, Acting Chief, Human Rights and Social Inclusion Unit at the Urban Practices Branch in the Global Solutions Division at UN Habitat. Honorable Ms. Maria Isabel Clamaco, Mayor of Zamboanga City in the Philippines. Ms. Gogontul Jang Paladi, Executive Director, Amania Group Consultancy and Pillar of Hope Organization in Botswana. Ms. Amanda Huston, Head of Policy and Advocacy, Equal Measures 2030, is based in UK. And Honorable Ms. Badia Banani, Présidente du Conseil d'Arrondissement, or Borough President of Agdal Riyadh in Rabat, Morocco, which will join by a recorded video. This webinar is part of the series UNOSD is organizing on the topics of the International Mayors Forum we are planning to hold in November this year. Through this webinar series, we aim to learn about the challenges and that local governments are facing, as well as the potential solutions for a rapid and sustainable recovery from COVID-19 as we prepare for the International Mayors Forum. The webinar takes place in October, referred to as Urban October, which began with the World Habitat Day on October 5th and will end with the World Cities Day on October 31st. To ensure that no one is left behind, the 2030 agenda calls for special effort to ensure that countries make accelerated progress in realizing the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. With the multiple co-benefits of advancing women's empowerment, it is clear that closing the gender equality gap is central to achieve the SDGs in communities everywhere. Today, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated inequalities and vulnerabilities, reversing progress on women's well-being and empowerment, impacting SDG 5 and 11 and other interdependent goals and targets. As the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic continue, local governments are facing multiple challenges in reducing inequality, especially gender inequality. Women have been central to ensuring continuity of public services during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially local health services, education, care, and more. It is necessary not only to recognize it, but also to ensure their inclusion in the design of local programs and response from the start. Through the participation of our panelists today, this webinar will focus on accelerating gender equality and empowering women to leave no one behind, particularly in our cities and communities. We look forward to hearing their insights and engaging you all in the discussion through the WebEx chat and Q&A. Thank you. Now I would like to move on quickly with the presentations. We don't have much time, so I would like also to remind the speakers to try to stay within their 8 minutes time and even shorten their intervention if possible, so we have even more time for the discussion at the end and the Q&As. So I'd like to call the first speaker, Ms. Angela Moy of UN Habitat. Angela, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Jean, and good to see you after such a long time. Colleagues and friends, very good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. And I'm honored and delighted to be in the presence of all of you to give these reflections. It is no doubt that urban areas have become epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic, with an estimated 90% of reported cases in towns and cities, And as you know, UN Habitat operates in the urban area. And this pandemic all forced us to all work under new normal situation. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, 53% of the urban population lives in informal settlements. These areas are densely populated with inadequate water and sanitation facilities, overcrowded public transport, and limited access to formal healthcare services. Recommended measures to prevent COVID-19 transmission, such as hand washing, physical distancing, self-quarantine, self-isolation, are almost impossible in informal settlements, which are badly overcrowded. In low and middle income countries, women are overrepresented in urban slums, and they carry the burden of water collection, especially in deprived households. For millions of women and girls, this reality increases the risk to sexual violence due to poor access to services and makes social distancing impossible. Women are more likely than men to work in low-wage and informal sectors without paid sick leave, health insurance, or social protection. Women and girls are facing increased risks of domestic violence, and you heard so many cases about the spike in domestic and gender-based violence, which we had to highlight. Authorities and community leaders need to keep high vigilance to intervene early where violence is found. And I always give the example of the Nyumba Kumi initiative, which is a neighborhood watch initiative. So if you hear violence going on in the house next door, you're always urged to go and knock and make an intervention because it's very often not well policed. When women do not form part of a decision-making process, their thoughts and issues are not brought to the table. And it's quite obvious that policies will miss out issues that affect women. And it's time that we take lessons from this COVID pandemic to ensure women's presence on board before the next disaster strikes, which is inevitable. City leaders should and must pay attention to women's needs and leadership, which will in turn strengthen the COVID-19 response. There is need to engage vulnerable groups. And I don't like to call them vulnerable groups. I like to call them groups in vulnerable situations in decision-making processes for response, recovery, preparedness, and risk reduction. And I'll be happy to hear from the other panelists on how they continue to engage their communities. One other aspect I'd like you to reflect on is the extension of social protection for women in the informal economy. Some cities already are providing cash transfers to informal workers, and I urge local authorities and decision makers to make this a really initiative that they can embrace. Thank you, Jan. You mentioned Urban October. UN Habitat developed Urban October to reflect on preparedness for a better urban future. Urban October offers an important opportunity to reflect on the effects of COVID-19 crisis and how we can shape the future of human settlements to be more resilient. And as part of this campaign, UN Habitat, and particularly my team, are working on something called the 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge. And this challenge will raise awareness worldwide on safety in cities, urban crime prevention, and to promote concrete actions by citizens. It is also aimed to encourage innovations for achieving the urban and safety dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. I encourage you all to please visit our website on Urban October and follow and promote and participate in this campaign and file any good practices that you may want to share. The UN Secretary General launched a policy brief on COVID-19 in the urban world. I would also urge you to look that up. And UN Habitat led, we collaborated with them to put very good inputs into this brief within a wide range of UN agencies and other local actors. UN Habitat is working with partners to make sure that gender differential impact of COVID-19 is taken into account in the response strategies at the country, regional, and global level. I'd like to urge governments and stakeholders to put women at the center of their efforts and place women's leadership and contributions in the heart of the COVID-19 response. We need to build systems that promote women's leadership in cities. Women must have a seat at the table. One thing that our executive director always keeps mentioning is the importance of data. People need to be reacting to empirical data during this pandemic so that women's needs and realities do not fall through the cracks. Friends, this is the time to act. National, regional, and local governments need to ensure there's specific focus in their response plans to prepare for and respond to outbreaks in informal settlements and slums, and that they mobilize partners on financing. And I think this is a very important issue, Jean, to talk about financing. Let's continue to advocate for strong leadership and commitment, especially at the local and country level, through gender policies and strategies, by outlining principal standards that promote gender equality, so that in actual fact, no one is left behind. Thank you, Jean, and I look forward to continued discussions. You talked about SDG 5 and SDG 11, and I would urge us to even go back to the basics and go to SDG 1 on poverty, because I think it all boils down to poverty. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you for all your continued leadership and solidarity in these discussions in implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you for your excellent presentation. And also, I think it's interesting also that you spoke about the urban october. It's a very important moment, and initiatives from UN Habitat. And thank you for mentioning about financing, because next week we'll have a webinar on financing with local authorities, so especially. So thank you so much. Now I would like to go to the next speaker, Honorable Ms. Maria Isabel Climaco. I hope your name, I say it's pronounced okay, Mayor of Zamboanga City in the Philippines.
Buenas tardes a todos. I'd like to share our experiences from Zamboanga City. Paz de Dios y abrazo de Nuestra Señora la Virgen del Pilar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My grandmother, Isabel Cortez Climaco, was a suffragist who championed Filipino women's right to vote and be voted upon. Next slide, please. Thanks to her efforts of countless women before me, I have the right to vote and be elected in public office, even the highest mandate in the city today. Battle tested in love as women in politics. Next slide. I face heavy challenges and detractors, but we always overcome with love, strength, and determination. Barely 60 days as mayor of our city was attacked by 500 rebels, where 120,000 people were displaced, and the United Nations declared Zamboanga City in the Philippines a humanitarian crisis. But a few years later, Zamboanga City in 2017 was recognized as the most improved city in the Philippines. Next slide. In 2019, I faced the toughest battle in my political career against a rich and powerful opponent, but by the grace of God, I was granted the mandate of our people for the third term. Next slide, please. In 2020, we now face the COVID-19 emergency, but our bishop commented that he was thankful that I am the mayor in this time of the pandemic. This crisis has proven that a woman's heart beats more like Mary when we fight our battles kneeling down. Next slide. Never underestimate the heart of a woman whose strength lies in love. So my administration's priority programs since I began as mayor in my first term up to my last term is SHE. This is gender fair because we have security, health, and education. If you remove the S from the SHE, it becomes a HE. Families are in the front line and the forefront of this pandemic, and we must protect our families first, and they have to have the responsibility of protecting each other. Next slide. To protect women and young girls amidst this pandemic, we are establishing a gender-based violence referral system. In the next slide. With partners, we are connecting women for capacity and skills training under new normal through webinars and entrepreneurship, finance, recovery, and resiliency. We are strengthening our GAD programs by ensuring that framework and policies for women empowerment and protection are in place. In the next slide, I will show you that I've signed our comprehensive ordinance. Next slide. 543 on anti-discrimination ordinance of Zamboanga City yesterday, October 14. Next slide, please. We amended our Gender and Development Code. The salient features are the creation of the Local Council for Women. Next slide. The inclusion of diverse sexual orientation. Next slide. Gender and identity and expression and sex characteristics. SOGIESC. Submission of community guide plans and budgets. Creation of Interagency Council on Violence Against Women and Children. Gender-based violence and expanded support mechanisms, developments, and service. Next slide. Our COVID battle cry is heal the sick and feed the hungry. Moving forward, our thrust to empower women focus on support access and representation, the establishment of the Production and Training Center for Women. Next slide. Support of local government initiatives supporting industries and products locally produced by women. We have our DTI One Town, One Product initiative. Next slide. Where our Miss Universe 2018 Catriona Gray and the Yakan Women Weavers promotion of local products made by women. They were displaced because of a war in their communities, and they have settled in our city and have continued on the tradition of women weavers. Partnerships with organizations for training and capacity building programs for women in skills, livelihood, and education under the new normal. Next slide. Representation of inclusive governance, women, the LGBTQIA, the youth mentoring and building up of young women. Next slide. Women in governance, and my administration has a capable women leading local government departments and offices, mainstreaming gender sensitivity and orientation and seminars. Next slide. We envision a gender-sensitive city where women are respected, enjoying equal rights in government and society, while being proactive, responsive, and self-reliant. Next slide. Women are active contributors to development, and they need to know that they have a voice and their voices are very important. Her story is my story. It is our story of girls, women, mothers, sisters, and grandmothers. So let us make her story happen so no girl or no woman will be left behind. When women succeed, the entire city and country succeeds. Muchas gracias y vaya con Dios.
Yeah, you're finished. I understand. Is it? Yes.
Yes,
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mayor Kamako. This is a very interesting. I'd like to hear more eventually, a bit later about the anti-discrimination ordinance, maybe later on. I will maybe see if we have any question. I think if we don't have, I don't see now. So maybe we'll move on, because then I know that, oops, I see now. Okay, I see information, but I don't see the question here for now. And I think we'll move on, because I know that Angela needs to finish, go maybe early. So thank you so much, Mayor. Then we'll go with the next presenter. Then Ms. Kugontul Jan Paladi, Executive Director, Amania Group for Consultancy and Organization in Botswana. So the floor is, the mic is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaren, and I hope that everyone is able to hear me. First of all, I'd just like to commend my fellow panelists, Mzwaye and Maria, for such really thought-provoking and really amazing interventions, and also just sharing experiences from their respective countries and their organizations, what they have been doing to safeguard women and girls' well-being and welfare during this period, which I think is really important. So thank you very much for that insight. From my part, I'm Horontle Jampaladi, and I'm from Botswana, and I run a community-based NGO that is called the Pillar of Hope Organization. But I am also running a development consultancy agency that is called Amanya Group, that is focused on Africa's human and social development activities or work. And, as I was reflecting on this panel discussion and thinking about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on women and girls, the first thing that came to my mind is a chat I had with my colleagues a couple of weeks back when we realized that there has been a spike or an increase in cases or incidents of gender-based violence and child sexual exploitation. And somebody was saying, did COVID exacerbate GBV and child sexual exploitation? And another colleague was actually saying that they don't think that COVID necessarily exacerbated this, but COVID revealed or exposed this, even more, and even expose the gaps that are there in terms of the referral system, in terms of the mechanisms that are supposed to be in place at the country level to help women and girls and protect them from gender-based violence. So I think it's a two-way side. There's one side where the pandemic has increased vulnerability of women and girls to gender-based violence, and there's another aspect where the prevalence has actually been high. It's just that now the pandemic has forced us to not look the other way and actually respond to the plight of women and girls. The first thing I want to say is that, SDG 5 talks about gender equality and empowering women and girls. And I've always been fearing that, this might end up being one of the SDGs that we do not successfully reach or realize the targets. Why? Because even though we always talk about gender equality, gender parity, women and girls inclusion and decision making in all aspects of life, this is still not high on the political agenda in many countries, especially in my region in Africa, where you see a lot of gaps in terms of gender parity and gender equality. So my challenge is that, some of these things are said just to gain some sort of political momentum or leverage. But when it comes to actions, when it comes to resources that are allocated to gender programming, when it comes to the strength of the legislation and normative frameworks at the country level that safeguard women's rights, we don't see that happening. We don't see that happening. So we really need to push that this becomes very high on the political agenda in every country, and not just in spoken words or in cosmetic aspects, but through the budget allocation, through the programming, through the policy and legislation that is in those countries. It's quite sad that when we talk about poverty, the face of poverty, the face of inequality, and the face of marginalization is female. This is across continents, across countries, across communities, as women and girls were still more vulnerable. And when we talk about how this year we are possibly facing historically high levels of inequality, gender inequality is the foundation of political inequality, economic inequality, labor market inequality. So unless we actually focus on and prioritize responding to gender inequality, we won't be able to close the gap on any other inequalities that exist. One of the unfortunate things is that, this year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries have had to take extreme measures in order to sort of flatten the curve or to reduce the transmission of COVID-19. I think we have to acknowledge that many countries were not prepared in terms of the healthcare system, financially, socially, politically, and in many other aspects to respond to the pandemic of this magnitude. So it is something we have to take into consideration, that many of the decisions were being made ad hoc and as and when it's necessary. And I think it's only now that because there's been some bit of research and even study going into the COVID-19 pandemic and response and how to mitigate, lowering the transmission rate, but also ensuring that you do not compromise too much on the socio-economic aspect. That's when I think now our countries are a little bit better at responding to the pandemic. But at the beginning, many countries, the first thing that happened was lockdown, restricted movement in order to lower the transmission. Just in my country, Botswana, I think we've had 3 lockdowns this year. We've had a lockdown that was almost 2 months. We've had a lockdown for 2 weeks and so on and so forth, And one of the sad things about having these lockdowns is that they increased women and girls' vulnerability to mostly gender-based violence, and to girls mostly child sexual exploitation. So we saw an increase in incidences of gender-based violence, incidences in child sexual exploitation. They also revealed how we really have a huge gap in terms of mechanisms that are supposed to help women and girls who are exposed to GBV, because there was a time in my country when we're actually having to do crowdfunding and crowdsourcing on social media, because we realized that we actually have about 1 or 2 shelters for gender-based violence survivors. And because there was an increase in these cases because of a very lengthy lockdown, women and children didn't have anywhere to go. And we're reaching out to people who have extra space in their homes or who have hotels that were not operational, to just ask them if they can accommodate GBV survivors, something that should have already been in place, because gender-based violence has always been high in my country and in my region particularly, but it's because it's something that has never been a priority topic. Nobody has ever thought that we should invest a lot of resources towards building these shelters until now, because everybody was just on lockdown and not working, and they had to focus on this, and it couldn't be ignored anymore. So it revealed a lot of gaps in the referral system as well. Lockdown also had some adverse economic impact as well. We know that in many countries, especially in Africa, women make up a significant part of the informal sector. Women, we are farmers, we are vendors, we do small side hustles and businesses and all of that. And of course, with lockdowns and permits being given to only essential service workers, it means that that woman who sells sweets on the street to support her family, she couldn't do that anymore. That woman who runs a hair salon couldn't do that anymore. And we know that in many homes in Africa and in my country particularly, many of the households are led by the women. Women are primary caretakers, caregivers, primary parents, and many times it's in a single-headed household where the only income is coming from the woman or from the mother. So having weeks turning into months of not being able to operate your small business, your hustle, it meant that this greatly affected the income of the household, and made a lot of households, especially those led by women, to fall much deeper into poverty. Our country, some countries, including mine, they had a lot of social security nets in place, but of course these were not sufficient. The other thing that I think has greatly affected women and girls as a result of the pandemic is around sexual reproductive health and rights. In many countries, even though the World Health Organization had classified sexual reproductive health services as an essential services, in many countries they actually did not consider sexual reproductive health services an essential service. So there was a period of a couple of weeks where women and girls were not allowed access to SRHR services, commodities, and so on and so forth, which means that we did regress a lot in the progress that we have made in attaining women's or safeguarding women's sexual reproductive health and rights. UNFPA reported that because of the pandemic, there's an estimated around 7 million unintended pregnancies from this year, and there's also been an increase in complicated births due to lack of access to emergency services as well as limited support during birth. So this would mean that the recovery, we probably have to go back to square one, or a couple of steps behind on the successes, the gains that we had made with regards to women's sexual reproductive health and rights. So I think basically, as Angela had said, one of the biggest problems why we face all of these is primarily because women are not at the decision-making table. Yes, as women, we are caregivers. We're actually at the front line, majority of us, of the COVID response. We are delivering the services, but we're not part of the decision making. We're not part of the programming. We're not part of where the agenda is actually set. The priorities are set. So our issues do not come up strongly. They're not reflected in the decisions that are made, even in the overall response. If I give you an example, if you look at the task force or committees that are leading the COVID response, there's very low representation of women. In my country, it was only about a week ago that a woman was included as one of the core leaders. But for the last, since March, we've been having 4 men at the forefront of leading the response. This is in addition to our president and vice president, who are both men. So I think the bigger issue here is that if women are not at the decision-making table, then women's issues and girls' issues will continue to be on the periphery and not a priority or at the top of the political agenda or any form of response mechanism. So I think for now, I'll just stop there on outlining the challenges that women and girls have faced in the last couple of months of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. I will leave time for the questions later on. So I would like to ask Ms. Amanda Austin, Health Policy Advocacy Equal Measures 2030, to start our presentation now. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Jean, and to all of my fellow panelists. Fascinating sharing that's coming from all different parts of the world, and so much to learn, I think, from each other. I loved Gogo talking about women and girls not being around the table, missing from so much of the response, and that really leads me to what I want to share about, which is missing from the data. And data, of course, is used for decision-making so often, and when girls and women aren't reflected within it, or their data is not being prioritized, they are, of course, invisible then and easy to ignore in these responses. And just as Gogo shared from Botswana, we're seeing a trend around the world where women are not at the table in the COVID-19 response planning. So few countries have women in those decision-making groups. And even more than a third of countries actually aren't reporting disaggregated data on COVID-19 cases or deaths. So even that very basic piece of information about whether it's men or women who are dying or contracting COVID-19 actually isn't being collected in a lot of countries. So let me share a little bit now about what my organization, Equal Measures 2030, does and how we approach gender data and how that connects both to the acceleration needed for the SDGs to be achieved, but also, of course, what kind of adaptations and changes are needed within a COVID-19 space. Next slide, please. So I want to share the main product that Equal Measures 2030 uses, which is an SDG Gender Index. So it's easy to think only of gender equality issues within SDG 5, but of course, we all know that they connect across the whole SDG framework. This group thinks about cities and communities. Of course, that makes us think of SDG 11, but also SDG 16, SDG 3, all of them have connections across the goals of achieving gender equality and empowering girls and women. So when we designed the index, we looked at indicators on how the SDGs were being achieved for girls and women across the SDG framework. And you can see more at our website, which is down there on the bottom, about each of the different indicators that we use within each goal. And it's the most comprehensive index on gender equality that's aligned to the SDGs. Each goal has 3 to 5 indicators within it, and they include both official indicators from the framework and complementary indicators where there are data gaps or challenges with the official indicators. Next slide, please. The first results of this index were released in 2019, and I'm going to go very quickly because of our time, but I just want to share very quickly that, of course, what this shows, what our findings were, is that an enormous number of people live in countries that receive a very poor score on the Gender Equality Index. And I'm sorry, that should be billion there. So 1.4, yeah. So 1.4 billion people live in countries that receive a very poor score on gender equality across the issues. But you can also see from some of these colored dots that actually all countries have areas of weakness and strength, and that's unsurprising, of course. But it means that there's a huge amount to learn, and it's not always a very clear division where you see countries that you might expect doing poorly. Actually, sometimes they're doing incredibly well on certain indicators and certain goals, and have a lot to share and teach other countries. And so do please explore more on that. Next slide, please. So using the index, we did some analysis early this year, this was pre-pandemic, released in February, that looked at trends. So we looked at 5 of the indicators within the SDG Gender Index to analyze where progress was going quickly, which countries were accelerating very quickly, and which countries were falling behind. So were they likely to achieve the goals by 2030? Next slide, please. We looked at 5 issues, and to be honest, these 5 issues were the only ones in which we had a sufficient historical data regularly to do analysis across thematic issues. But this included access to contraception, completion of secondary school by girls, women in senior government and ministerial roles, laws on workplace, laws on gender equality within the workplace, and then really crucially and important for all of my speakers that have spoken already, and I think everyone hopefully in the room, is women's perception of safety in public spaces. So this is the extent to which women say they feel safe walking at night in the area in which they live. And it's perhaps unsurprising for many around here that that is the indicator that is furthest behind of all of these. So on all of these issues, we need to accelerate progress much, much faster to achieve them by 2030. But on women's perception of safety, you can see globally, we need to move 13 times faster if we want to achieve that by 2030. And so it's really far behind. Next slide, please. If we just dive in, this is a good illustrative example. If we look at Senegal, specifically, you can see a trend line starting at 2004, and you can see that that is going down, that it's actually gotten worse for women in their perceptions of their safety at night in Senegal in the last 10 to 15 years. And that would need a complete reversal. And you can see that solid line is the trend line that we would need if Senegal were to actually achieve this goal by 2030. And Senegal is just one example, but there are so many more, and globally this is going down in so many places. 10 countries have seen really steep declines where women say that they do not feel safe, and they feel less and less safe over the years, declining by 28%, 27% in Tunisia, significant declines in these areas. And of course, as my colleagues have shared, that's only getting worse in COVID-19, where gender-based violence is actually increasing based on the anecdotal evidence that we have. Next slide, please. So of course, as I said, the trends were already worrying for many countries, and this was the analysis we did in February. And as my colleagues have shared from their experiences within their different countries and communities, the reality for girls and women within a COVID-19 space is that they're likely to see decreases in their access to their rights, in their ability to get support with gender-based violence, in their ability to continue to work. And of course, they are also most likely to be in some of the more vulnerable categories that might have been impacted. So in the informal economy, working part-time, in single-family households, women-headed households, and likely to have lower paid jobs. So the Secretary General said, and it was absolutely borne out by the experiences that we've seen in the last months, is that COVID-19 could reverse the limited progress that has been made on gender equality and women's rights. Data on COVID-19's impacts at the global level on girls and women is really limited. And so many national statistics offices are actually struggling to perform their normal operations and to gather their basic data, let alone disaggregated data and looking at the specific impact on girls and women. But data from the local level is really clear, and Gogo mentioned some examples of this just from talking to her colleagues, and Mayor Clemico has mentioned this as well. If we go to the next slide, we can see where local level data and information is playing such an important role in helping to fill the gender data gap and address the challenges with COVID-19 and its impacts on girls and women. So I just want to share in my final slide a couple of examples, because Equal Measures 2030 not only compiles data and does research, but we also work directly with gender equality advocates in both civil society and government and in the private sector to actually make sure that these data are used, because we all know that there's plenty of data out there that actually just simply isn't useful or used for decision making because of capacity, because of time, because of constraints, because of politics. So in Indonesia, we work with a partner named Kapal Perempuan, and they focus on child marriage and recognizing that child marriage was a significant issue, but incredibly varied across the country, high rates in some areas, very low rates in others. They worked with local data collectors, all of them women, to capture micro-level data at the subnational level to try to highlight what were the key issues within particular areas that needed to be addressed to try to end or reduce child marriage within those areas. And that provided a much richer picture and much richer data than national aggregated data alone. And they used that to successfully lobby for change and a change in the law to increase the age of marriage. In India, and specifically on COVID-19, our partner Sahaj is actually working with expectant and new mothers to track what the impact has been on maternal health services of COVID-19. And it's no surprise that it's been stark and that resources are being diverted to address COVID-19, and women and girls are not receiving the care that they need through their maternity and immediately following. And that's such important data for their advocacy to highlight this gap for girls and women. So this leads me to my final point, which is just that more and better gender data are crucial to decision-making, not just in an SDG context, but of course, particularly to respond effectively to COVID-19. But we also need to work with and partner with local groups, advocates, and I say advocates in its broadest term, government, civil society, from the private sector, to help gather data, to help gather stories and evidence, to help fill these gender data gaps, because otherwise we will miss so much of the lived experiences of girls and women. Thank you very much, Sean. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Angela, with this for this very interesting presentation. And then I see that you finished with also the links to April 2030. And I hope, I'm sure that your data are available, so it's very good source for everyone. So I encourage people to go there and use these data. Thank you very much. It was very interesting talking about the bending the curve. And again, I was working with Angela, at the UN Habitat years ago, and then the woman's perception of security in public spaces is also an important thing that doesn't improve. One would think that it would improve, over time, but it's getting the opposite way it should go. So maybe you want to discuss this later. I'd like now to go quickly to the next presentation, which is a video, and then we'll go for the questions and Q&A. So I think hopefully we won't have any problem with video. It is from the Honorable Ms. Badia Benani. She's a Présidente du Conseil d'arrondissement or Borough President of Agdia Al Riyadh in Rabat, Morocco.
Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, honorable assistance. Je suis Badia Abneni, présidente de l'arrondissement Agdia Al Riyadh, un des 5 arrondissements de la ville de Rabat, capitale du Maroc. Je tiens tout d'abord, par cette conjoncture de pandémie Covid-19, à vous souhaiter de rester en bonne santé. Je tiens aussi à exprimer mes vifs remerciements aux organisateurs pour m'avoir associé à vous pour partager la contribution de notre collectivité territoriale et son engagement dans la réalisation de l'ODD 5. Il faut dire que le principe d'égalité entre la femme et l'homme a été institué dans notre pays dans la Constitution de 2011. D'autre part, la loi organique qui légifère nos collectivités territoriales invite à la création de commissions de parité et d'égalité de chance en tant qu'organe consultatif des communes chargé de veiller et développer la participation citoyenne et le respect de l'approche. Moi-même, en tant que maire, aspire à transformer sa localité en un territoire intelligent, entre autres durable, inclusif et résilient. Je veille à contribuer à la réalisation de quelques objectifs de développement durable et tout particulièrement à l'égalité femmes-hommes et à l'autonomisation des femmes et des jeunes filles. Et pour ce, et au sein de notre administration, j'ai veillé à la nomination de plusieurs cadres femmes au poste de décision en tant que chef de division et de service à raison de 40%. Et pour nos concitoyennes, nous veillons à promouvoir l'économie sociale et solidaire par l'organisation d'ateliers et d'expositions annuelles d'artisanat et de produits de terroir au profit des coopératives qui, pour la majorité, appartiennent à des femmes. Et en guise d'investissement dans le capital immatériel et tout particulièrement l'autonomisation financière de la femme et de la jeune fille, nous avons veillé à l'organisation d'ateliers d'entrepreneuriat pour les jeunes femmes et l'accompagnement de plusieurs programmes de formation de jeunes, dont le montage d'entreprises sociales, en plus des ateliers annuels organisés au sein de notre centre socio et éducatif, comme la coiffure, la cuisine, l'esthétique et autres ateliers. Pour le bien-être et la santé mentale des femmes et des jeunes filles, nous organisons des ateliers de soirées musicales, des ateliers et expositions d'art plastique et des ateliers de yoga, ainsi que diverses activités sportives. Pour les jeunes écolières, nous avons organisé des ateliers et émissions radio pour promouvoir les valeurs de citoyenneté. Les jeunes étudiantes n'ont pas été laissées à l'écart. Nous les impliquons dans des projets citoyens comme la formation de 30 jeunes, dont des jeunes filles, pour devenir des ambassadeurs de l'arrondissement vert, la proposition de solutions pour la transformation de leur campus universitaire en territoire intelligent par l'organisation d'un hackathon interdisciplinaire en collaboration avec l'université et plusieurs institutions d'enseignement supérieur. Nous les avons impliqués aussi dans l'étude et l'aménagement d'un jardin urbain pour qu'il soit désenclavé, durable et accessible aux personnes à mobilité réduite, et plusieurs autres études urbanistiques dans notre territoire. Et pour donner le bon exemple et valoriser les compétences, nous veillons à rendre hommage tout particulièrement aux femmes leaders dans plusieurs domaines, l'enseignement, le sport, le journalisme, l'art et autres, et ce, lors de soirées grand public. Mesdames et messieurs, pour nos services communaux et pour pouvoir les fournir dans des conditions qui garantissent la dignité de tout un chacun dans des conditions de bonne gouvernance, nous avons recouru à leur digitalisation progressive en adoptant une plateforme nationale pour le bureau d'ordre électronique, une plateforme pour les services urbanistiques et une digitalisation partielle des services de l'état civil. Honorable assistance, tous ces efforts déployés pour contribuer à la réalisation des objectifs de l'ODD 5 furent réalisés à l'approche participative avec des organismes institutionnels, la société civile et la communauté scientifique. Nous savons que c'est un travail de longue haleine que nous, maires des villes, devrons mener et que de gros efforts devraient se faire pour l'aménagement des territoires, pour qu'ils soient désenclavés, pour le transport en commun, pour qu'il soit accessible et adapté aux femmes et jeunes filles, nos rues pour qu'elles soient bien éclairées, nos services communaux pour qu'ils soient accessibles à tous, et veiller surtout à garantir l'accès à l'éducation pour les jeunes filles et l'autonomisation financière pour les femmes en général. Je tiens à souligner l'importance de la coopération et l'organisation de tels webinaires qui contribuent à l'échange d'expériences et pratiques en différents acteurs. Merci à tous.
So, yeah, thank you. Well, I would like to thank the Honorable Mayor Ms. Badia Benani, President du Conseil d'arrondissement, Borough President of Agdial Riyadh in Rabat Rumoko for this message. And I would like now to open the floor for the question. I see there's some questions here. Maybe someone wants to pick up. I raised the question a bit earlier, but say, what are some of the barriers or walls that men still carries, which need to be addressed when it comes to gender equality and women emancipation? So this came. I don't know who would like to respond to this. I see you, Mayor Klanako. Maybe you want to speak of this, and also I think you want to say more. Also, so go ahead, please. Mayor, please, you need to unmute your mic.
Okay. There seems to be a barrier that we still experience today in terms of gender equality on people that discriminate women, particularly in terms of thinking us to be weak. That is why we have proven time and again that we are able to multitask, and it is something that I always advocate, particularly in our gender sensitivity trainings. It is not a competition of sexes, but it is a collaboration of sexes. And we have to look at the rights of each and every one of us together with our skills that have to complement. And if we are able to complement this without thinking that it is a competition, then there should be a sense of respect. We will be able to get things done. Thank you, Jean. Merci beaucoup.
Here, I think it connects well. You talked about your anti-discrimination ordinance. I think that was very impressive, and maybe you want to say a word on that, or?
Well, it took around 2 years for the city government to pass this, but originally it was from the LGBTQ community. We realized that we don't only talk about a problem of the LGBTQ, it's not only a problem of women, but it is an encompassing anti-discrimination of people by sex, by age, by creed, by color, or by status. That is why yesterday, even our indigenous people representative, the PWD representative was also present, because we are sending the message across that in our city, the rights of everyone should be respected. We also sense a problem in COVID-19. The frontliners, people that are positive and have gotten well, do not experience acceptance in the community, and they are discriminated upon because of fear. Small communities do not accept isolation areas, all because of fear. So to break the barrier of discrimination, what is needed is education. And I always am a firm believer that we're able to educate our communities to make them informed, then we will lessen the barriers of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Kanako. I'd like to invite other speakers if they want to join the conversation on this or another question. Angela, you're there. Oh, sorry, I saw a message that you were going. So please, yeah, Angela, I know you have to
yes, I have to go now in like 2 minutes, but I just wanted to say that there is no gender equality without the involvement of men. We cannot do it alone. I think the issue of masculinity is a discussion. I think even the Latin American gender equality practitioners really promote, because if you don't deal with that, then you're talking to yourselves. Right. We really need the involvement of men and women and boys and girls, and to start to having these discussions at a very early age, so that the discrimination is not something that is institutionalized in the minds of those young people. So yes, definitely we need to have the involvement of everybody in these discussions on gender equality. And Jeanne, thank you for this opportunity. I really have to run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you for your presentation, and then thank you for your last words. And I hope we will continue to work together. So thanks so much. I would like to invite Ms. Gongolto Jang Paladi. You want to say something?
Thank you very much, Shannon. Feel free to just call me Gigi. I know my name is very long and a bit difficult to pronounce, so Gigi is fine. I think basically many of the questions are more or less the same, but I just wanted maybe to just point out two things. I think somewhere at the top there, I saw a comment around why is it that women are not being invited to be part of this panel discussion. And I don't know. I mean, as far as I see, I think the moderator is the only man and the panelists are all women. So I don't know whether this person was referring to a certain caliber of women. I also believe I consider myself a woman as well. That's why I'm part of this panel. I know that sometimes we tend to feel there's only a certain type of women that can represent fully women's issues, but you need to know that women's issues affect all of us. It doesn't matter where you come from, whether you're from a privileged background or not, whether you're from Asia or Africa, how old you are, what is your position in society or your current status. All of us have been girls, all of us have been women. We've all experienced that, the challenges that we talk to, and we're still experiencing them. You know, I still tell people that I've never in my entire life met a woman who's never experienced sexual harassment in their entire life, whether in childhood or in the professional space. We continue to still be marginalized, you know, regardless of your position. You may be holding a very distinguished high profile position, but you still here and there find face some level of being undermined, being disrespected, even facing harassment. So I think we need to really not profile women to think just because maybe right now I look pretty on the camera, it means that I am insufficient to adequately represent women's issues. I'm a young woman. I'm in the informal sector. I come from a background that is not privileged, and I am based in Africa. So when I talk about these are issues that I've seen firsthand, and this is why I'm involved in this kind of work. The other thing I wanted to also say is that we need to realize something. When we talk about gender equality, it is not a women's issue. When we talk about gender-based violence, it's not a women's issue, it's an everybody's issue. Because, I've seen, even at leadership level, I've seen this happening at the parliament or the National Assembly, where people will say, why is it that women parliamentarians are not talking about Why is it that parliamentarians are not talking about gender issues? Because these are not issues about women only. Don't say, why is it that women are not talking about gender-based violence? Ask yourself, why is it that we are not all concerned in talking about gender-based violence and wanting to safeguard a safer environment and accord women's human rights, including sexual and reproductive rights? So I think we need to look at it from a perspective that it's a collective social responsibility to create safer spaces for women and girls to not only survive, but to thrive, to transform, and be able to realize their full potential. So please let us not look at this from a perspective that because it's women's issues, only women should raise their voices around that. You should ask yourself, in your sphere of influence, what are you doing to ensure the empowerment, the betterment, and the advancement of women and girls that you work with in your community, in your circle, in your sphere of influence? Because you'll realize that the only difference between a woman and a man is opportunity. We just give less opportunities to women, less opportunities to girls than the boy child. So if we close that gap, we'll be able to do that. The last thing I want to say is that I am appreciative of somebody who was suggesting teaching women martial arts or like karate. And let me say that, I live in a country with such high gender-based violence prevalence that a couple of years ago, I decided to even take karate lessons, and I walk around with a pepper spray because you just never know when you might be the next victim. And the other thing about my country is that it even tends to femicide because women and girls are being murdered. It's not just being raped and being beaten, but they're actually being killed. And I say that is actually a welcome development. And this is not something that we should leave the responsibility to governments or the UN. This is where, as civil society, we should come in and say we're going to start an initiative that's going to teach girls martial arts about self-protection and all of that. But also we need to realize that gender-based violence is really multifaceted. It talks about it's mainly about issues of toxic masculinities that come from our culture, our religious associations and social aspects and norms and misconceptions around that. And GBV is really centered around power issues. So yes, we can teach women and girls how to dress properly, to not be a victim, where to walk, what time, and all of those things, martial arts. But if we want to really uproot gender-based violence, we need to go to the root cause and change the way we socialize the relationship between boys and girls, between men and women. That is fundamentally how we are going to do that. The very last thing I want to say is that please, wherever you are, let us get women into power position. Advocacy works, and it's very important to do advocacy and make noise. But the only way for you to be effective is if you are around the decision-making table. So women run for positions at local and national level, but we don't vote for the candidates. Some of them do not vie because they don't have the capacity to run political campaigns. If we really want women's leadership to really be prominent, if we really want to change the landscape around women's issues, women's well-being, women and girls' well-being and welfare, the dynamic needs to change. The leadership face and the landscape needs to change. So let us capacitate women politicians, vote for them in power, support them, and let them drive the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lily. I'd like to ask, I see there's a question about the climate change, and I think it could also go to, it could also touch upon one, the natural disasters, and then we know that in the Philippines they're quite touched by this. But I'd like to go to Amanda, and maybe she can also respond the other way around, if they have such gender security data that are needed for the climate change and disaster. I mean, which is very, very neat. I worked in the Philippines actually on early recovery after the Yolanda typhoon, and then I know how much these data are very, very important. So maybe Angela, you can talk a bit on this, if you well, first, I mean, if you have such data, I mean, if you have experience of working with countries where are facing a lot of disasters and or climate change issues.
It's not a focus of Equal Measures 2030, but you raise a really important point about the gaps in gender data related to climate. And actually, when we were trying to design which indicators would fit in the index under SDG 13, it was almost impossible because there's so little data available at a global level about the extent to which women and girls are being affected by climate change. What we use as one proxy, which is imperfect, but it goes to what Gigi was sharing, that women around the decision-making table, when it comes to climate change conferences, is an indicator, one imperfect indicator, of whether or not girls' and women's needs are being addressed and understood within decision-making spaces related to climate change. But I think perhaps I would actually share this question back to Mayor Climaco to share specifically within the Philippines what that looks like for you.
Mayor, go ahead, please.
Yeah, actually, we are having difficulty because right now we have heavy rains and it took time for me to come over. We are looking at our national resiliency pillar that helps us address the different man-made and natural disaster aside from the pandemic. And using the lens of gender and development vis-a-vis climate response, we really have to train our communities to be resilient. We have a very successful program in the Philippines called 4Ps for families, wherein mothers are trained to be part of a focus group discussion to prepare them for emergencies. They are taught what is needed in times of flooding, in times of fire, and be able to protect the family themselves. These are all funded by the national government down to the local communities, wherein the families, the mothers, are empowered to respond to climate change in our call to be resilient, resistant, and responsive.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Now I'd like, I see, a question also, how we can encourage women to go in politics, and be engaged in local government. So maybe that's one thing that I think you touched upon this, Mayor. Maybe you want to say something. Let's ask, can you highlight three main challenges you have faced between in this? In your
The first
career?
challenge the first challenge is really being a woman. Men are the society tends to put us down for being women because they view us as weak and are very emotional. So we have to really be educated, but also to be able to send the message of what we are able to contribute to the community. The second challenge is age. Sometimes they put us down because of our age. They don't take us seriously. And thirdly, there is really a challenge of being put down because of our gender and prejudice. So with these three challenges that I have experienced, being young, being inexperienced, and also by virtue of being women, I was able to, with the grace of God, win it through the heart, through love. I realize that what we're talking about, the love quotient, is very, very important. It is not something that you set aside, but it is something that meets the heart of our response, that we have to take our jobs very seriously, to be credible, to be competent, and be able to be committed to the work. Credibility really matters in our job in politics. A very classic example, being a macho society, it's okay for male politicians to go in the karaoke and sing, but it is not okay for women politicians to do the Zumba. So they put me down as the Zumba queen, but in this time of the pandemic, we realize that the karaoke is not allowed, but Zumba at home is allowed, and it will keep you healthy.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for this, your thoughts on this. Very interesting. And I have to say that I had to do karaoke when I was in the Philippines, working with my colleagues there. So I know what you're talking about. It's very, very important there in the Philippines. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask maybe final thoughts, because the time is already gone. But the question here: what is your top priority for all the speakers? Your top priority for local, national authorities and actors to accelerate gender equality and women's empowerment in our cities? And of course, we're also thinking about achieving the SDGs, SDG 5 and 11 in particular, by 2030. So maybe I will ask if we have Gigi quickly, and then Amanda, and so maybe Gigi, are you on? Are you with us? Hi.
Yes, I'm on.
It's shortly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Hello?
Yes. We hear you.
Thank you very much. I think I want to just first of all thank everyone for this really fruitful deliberations. I think there are a couple of things that I also learned from the comments that came through and the questions and answers. Thank you for the compliments, for those who've been saying really wonderful things. I've read all of them. Fortunately, I wasn't able to respond. Just before I conclude, there was one comment earlier on that talked about innovations, and I think that is really, really important. Innovations that could help with reaching out to women in different communities with various services. And I want to say that that's one of the things that we've been trying to do as an organization. We've been trying to see how we can incorporate artificial intelligence and using boards, and as well as for USSD platforms to reach out to women, especially in rural areas where they may not have strong network connectivity or access to the internet. So doing things offline might be more effective for them. So we've developed some platforms that help women with, maternal health, sexual reproductive health information, access to services, and all of those things. And these are things that we've developed, and we're hoping that in future we can find partnership to be able to increase our reach to women in different communities, particularly in rural and vulnerable communities, with all these innovations. So innovation is definitely the way to go. It can help with increasing access to information, but also in collecting of data, as Amanda was talking about the huge data gaps that exist. I think at the end of the day, let us know that issues around gender equality, leaving no one behind, are not women's issues alone. This is a collective agenda that should affect all of us. In 2020 and beyond, we should not be having any community in the world, whether in Africa or wherever, that we call hard to reach. Because I always say, why is it that there are communities that we call hard to reach? But if you go there, you'll find a bottle of soda. If you go there, you'll find political parties party merchandise. So it means that they're not hard to reach. We're just not choosing to reach them with the right information and services. But when we need their vote or we need them to buy our products, we do reach them. So let us ensure that we leave no one behind, as the SDG says, and we all do our part in ensuring gender equality and safer environments for women and girls. Thank you very much, UNDESA, for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Gigi. Good comment. I like your comment on people being hard to reach. That should not exist. As you say, colas and many products are reaching them. So we should make sure that we do also. Thank you so much. Before closing, I'd like to ask Honorable Mayor Clemaco, if you have something you want, maybe final words. You need to unmute.
John, Gigi, and Amanda, muchas gracias for giving us this opportunity to participate. Just a takeaway, what is very important for gender fair and development communities is inclusivity. We must respect girls, boys, women, men, LGBTQIA, but really listening to their voices. To me, I always say that let us help make our children's future a reality, because I really listen to diverse voices. Being young, they have wisdom to share with us. And I believe that we're just here to keep the seat hot for them, because the future of our generation is really in the young people. I'd like to thank Jasmine, Mohammed Sali, Garnet, Francisco, my millennials of the city government that put up this talk. And what is our message? In this COVID pandemic, inclusivity is very important. Listening to diverse voices, but making sure that they have a stake in the community. What we need to do is to set up ordinances that listen to anti-discrimination policies and gender and development programs. But what is also very important in this time of the pandemic, when everything seems bleak, to look at the rainbow in the rain. First, we have faith in God, hope in the new normal that we have to adjust, and love of family. And I think those are the very important takeaways, so as not to leave anyone behind. Your voice matters, and her story begins with our story. If women contribute to the society, then we are able to contribute to the world.
Thank you very much, Mayor Clemaco, for this your very nice words. Sorry. And then I think we'll conclude here. Before I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers. I'd like to repeat their names. Ms. Angela Moy, she left, but she did a very good presentation and also discussion. Acting Chief at the Human Rights and Social Inclusion Unit, Urban Practice Branch, the Global Solution Division at UN Habitat. You, Mayor Honorable Maria Isabel Clemaco, Mayor of Zamboanga City in the Philippines, and Ms. Gogontli Jang Faladi, Executive Director, Amania Group, Consultancy and Pillar of Hope Organization in Botswana. Unfortunately, Ms. Amanda had to leave, Amanda Austin, but I'd like to also to thank her, that she had a policy at advocacy at Equal Measures 2030. And also Honorable Mayor Ms. Tadia Benani, Borough President of Agdial Riyadh in Rabat, Morocco. I would like to thank, beside the speakers, I would like to thank all the participants and the UNOSD staff who were involved in this webinar. I'd like to thank you all. This is amazing. Please stay tuned with us, because we will do more webinars, but we'll also have the International Mayors Forum in November. We'll have it virtually, but also in forms of webinars, but we'll maybe go more deeply in some of the themes we have been exploring so far. So please stay with us on this. And I would like to also make the announcement that next week we had this, Angela referred to that, the investment. So next week, 22nd of October, at the same time, we'll have the impact investment in cities, innovations to finance the SDG locally. So we'll have this. And on this, I would like to thank you very much again to the speakers, the participants, the audience, and I wish you the best recovery, and then the best for in those difficult times. And I hope we'll continue to interact together. It's just the beginning in our case. Thank you so much.